Welcome back. We start from India, where massive rallies have been held against the controversial new citizenship law. Demonstrations were held in the Indian states of West Bengal, Assam, and the capital, New Delhi. In West Bengal, Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee led a massive protest march in Kolkata. Thousands of people came out on the streets in their Barga city of northeastern Assam state. Protesters gathered in Delhi's Mandi House area despite a ban imposed by the government. Meanwhile, a German student was asked to leave India after he participated in an Anti-Citizenship Act protest in Chennai. 25 people have been killed in ongoing protests across the country in the last 2 weeks. In a related development, the US has condemned religious and state violence in protests against the controversial citizenship law in India. US Commission on International Religious Freedom called on New Delhi to stop the use of force on demonstrators. Meanwhile, the Human Rights Watch also criticized the Indian government's use of brutal force. In a report, the rights body said all the deaths have occurred in states ruled by the Bharatiya Janata Party. In another development, scores of people have protested against India's controversial citizenship law in South Africa. The protest was held outside India's Consulate General in Johannesburg. Demonstration organizers said their aim is to show solidarity with protesters in India. They said they are pleased to register outrage against New Delhi's right-wing Hindutva agenda. Protesters appealed to South Africa's ruling African National Congress-led government to break its silence on India's atrocities and killings. Meanwhile, New Delhi is cutting off internet services in various parts of India as protests against its controversial citizenship bill continue. This is one of the BJP government's favorite techniques, with authorities ordering providers to suspend services 95 times this year. But the situation is the worst in Indian-occupied Kashmir, which has had no internet since 5th August. This report will tell you more.
The people of the occupied Kashmir were transported decades into the past when India scrapped the valley's special status as a disputed territory. There are virtually no internet services for ordinary people, and the economy has suffered as a consequence. The valley has already lost 100,000 jobs and suffered $1.7 billion in economic losses.
Honestly speaking, we haven't made a single penny for the last 4 or 5 months. And the situation is very bad in terms of our business, and we don't see any hope right now. It's complete hopeless situation we are in right now.
The only relief New Delhi has allowed the Kashmiri people are these internet kiosks. There are about a dozen of them in the valley, which has 7 million inhabitants. One person can only use the kiosk 10 to 15 minutes at a time, and accessing social media sites is prohibited.
We are here for the scholarship scheme here, and the difficulties are the net is very slow and sometimes net is not working, and that's why I'm pleasing Government of India to restore the internet blockade in Kashmir.
After the passing of the Citizenship Amendment Bill, New Delhi has also cut off services in Assam and West Bengal. But protests against the new law have only gained momentum. It remains to be seen now if the BJP will listen to the will of the people or crack down on them harder.
We now go to Afghanistan, where 7 Afghan soldiers have been killed in a Taliban attack in northern Balkh province. The Defense Ministry says 6 security officers, including 3 intelligence personnel, were wounded in the attack. The ministry said the attack was launched at a joint military base of Afghan forces and intelligence agency, the National Directorate of Security. It said the incident occurred in the Khalil Goli area of Balkh's Dawalatbad district. The Taliban are yet to comment on the incident. This month marks 40 years since the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. The conflict ended poorly for both countries, accelerating the decline of the USSR and sparking a civil war in Afghanistan that continues to this day. This report has more.
The Soviets pulled out of this country in 1989, but their destroyed tanks are still scattered across the Afghan landscape. Armed using American funds, the Afghan people and volunteers from across the Muslim world waged a bloody insurgency against Russian occupation. 14,000 Soviet troops were killed before the Kremlin finally took its soldiers back home.
Yes, it was difficult, and yes, it's true that at least 40% of people who fought in Afghanistan are no longer alive, but that's life. Any war for anyone who took part in it is hard.
But for Afghans, the consequences were even more tragic. 2 million were killed in the war and 7 million forced to flee the country. By the 1990s, the country was in a state of civil war, which eventually brought the Taliban to power.
I always thought that what we were doing was necessary. Even being an 18-year-old guy, I realized that such a big country, a superpower, had to control what happens in its underbelly.
40 years after the Soviet invasion, Afghanistan still isn't at peace. And with the US preparing to pull out of the country, there are fears the country may descend into another civil war.
Moving on to Iran, which has unveiled new operations at its Arak heavy water nuclear reactor, countering US sanctions pressure. The development does not violate the 2015 nuclear deal, but it takes Tehran's program closer to weapons-grade levels. State media said technicians switched on the secondary circuit at Arak. Iran's nuclear agency head Ali Akbar Salehi said the secondary circuit transfers heat to cooling system of the reactor. He said the entire reactor system will go online in 2021. Tehran has been reactivating parts of its nuclear program in protest at the US withdrawal last year. China, Japan and South Korea have agreed to cooperate to promote dialogue between the US and North Korea. South Korea's President Moon Jae-in made the announcement at a joint press conference after the opening ceremony of a trilateral summit in Chinese city of Chengdu. This follows US Special Envoy for North Korea Stephen Bigen's visit to the three countries amid Pyongyang's looming year-end deadline. China's Premier Li Keqiang, Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and South Korean President Moon pledged to promote free trade. Chinese Premier Keqiang advocated for the establishment of China, Japan, South Korea Free Trade Zone.
China has always promoted the establishment of China, Japan, South Korea Free Trade Zone. We should speed up the process. Actually, the China, Japan, South Korea Free Trade Zone and the three countries' supply chains are complementary.
Meanwhile, Russia has released 24 Japanese fishermen and their vessels after detaining them off the disputed Pacific Islands. Japan's foreign ministry said the 5 boats departed a port in Kanashiri Island, one of the 4 southern Kuril Islands disputed by Tokyo and Moscow. Government spokesman Yoshide Suga said the fishermen are in good health. A Russian court ordered the fishermen to pay a $100,000 fine, which was paid before leaving. The 5 ships were detained last week after allegedly exceeding their quota for octopus allowed under a 1998 agreement. France says it has carried out its first armed drone strike, killing 7 militants in central Mali. The deployment comes nearly 1 month after 2 French helicopters collided in Mali, killing 13 soldiers. France has joined a tiny group of countries that use armed drones, including the United States. In a statement, the Defense Ministry said the drone attack was part of operations in Mali that killed 40 terrorists. It said the strike targeted militants in the Ouagadougou forest. The ministry said French commandos were attacked when they were patrolling the combat zone. Trade unions and the government have decided to meet on the 7th January to discuss the pension reforms in France. Prime Minister Edouard Philippe's office says the talks are set to run through the month of January. Train and metro drivers continue to strike for the 20th straight day over pension reform. Train operators have issued a warning that traffic will be severely disrupted over the Christmas holiday as they will halt trains between Paris and its suburbs. Earlier, talks between the government and union leaders for holiday truce failed to ease the standoff. The workers have rejected President Macron's pension reform plan to replace 42 separate regimes with a single points-based pension system. U.S. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says Republicans have not ruled out calling witnesses in the upcoming impeachment trial. The Kentucky Republican earlier suggested to quickly acquit U.S. President Donald Trump of the 2 articles of impeachment. Last week, McConnell rejected Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's request to call 4 witnesses for the Senate trial. The proposed witnesses included acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and former National Security Advisor John Bolton.
My colleague wants a special pre-trial guarantee of certain witnesses whom the House Democrats themselves did not bother to pursue as they assemble their case. Or he wants to proceed without giving any organizational resolution whatsoever. So as I said, we remain at an impasse on these logistics.
We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Venezuela has arrested 11 people in connection with the attack on a remote military outpost in southern Bolivar state over the weekend. Authorities said some suspects fled across the border to Brazil with stolen weapons. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro accused Brazil, Colombia, and Peru of backing assailants. All 3 countries have denied involvement in the attack, where 1 Venezuelan soldier was killed. During an address on state television, Maduro called on Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro to cooperate.
I said to the government of Brazil, Venezuelan weapons were stolen in a terrorist attack. Mr. Jair Bolsonaro, and regarding these weapons, we have information that they are on Brazilian territory. We call on Brazilian authorities to capture those assailants who are on Brazilian territory and to return the weapons of Bolivarian armed forces.
President Sebastián Pinera has enacted a law that will allow Chile to hold a referendum on 26 April to change the Pinochet-era constitution. Changing the constitution was one of Pinera's main promises in a bid to end 2 months of protests against his government. It was enacted under former dictator Augusto Pinochet. President Pinera said this reform opens the doors and defines a path to achieve a great constitutional agreement. In Indonesia, 25 people died after a bus plunged into a ravine in South Sumatra province. Police say 14 others were injured in the incident that took place just before midnight. The bus was carrying dozens of passengers when it careered into the 150-meter ravine. Police said the accident happened in a remote and steep area near the town of Pagar Alam. Rescue officials warned that the toll may rise as some people are still trapped inside the bus. They said search teams have been deployed to look for more victims. There will be no Christmas Mass at Paris's Notre Dame Cathedral, which was gutted by a fire in April this year. The last time Mass was cancelled at the iconic medieval cathedral was in the year 1803. More in this report.
Parisians will observe Mass at the Saint Germain Auxerrois Church this year. Meanwhile, Notre Dame's rector, Archpriest Patrick Chauvet, has given French Catholics assurances that the cathedral will be open to the public soon.
For every believer of Notre Dame's, I think it will be a sign of hope to say, let's be patient, let's wait. The Virgin Mary waited for the birth of her son. We are waiting for the rebirth of the cathedral.
For now, the cathedral remains buried under its melted scaffolding. Removing it will require a special crane, which is currently being assembled.
We need to try and remove the scaffolding. This is the difficult part. It weighs several tons, so we have to make sure it does not fall on the vaults that were not damaged.
Once assembled, the crane will measure 80 meters, but it's unlikely the cathedral will be fit to host next year's Christmas Mass either.
We now go to Finland, where a record number of tourists are visiting northern Lapland region in search of an authentic Christmas experience. But despite the economic benefits, the tourism trend is facing criticism over environmental concerns and impact on the area's indigenous people. This report will tell you more.
Santa Claus Village on the Arctic Circle is about as close to a real-life Christmas card scene as it's possible to get. Visitors, especially from Europe, stayed for an all-time high of 3 million nights last year, and Lapland tourism is now catching on in lucrative new markets, such as China.
We see big differences in what activities the different customer groups like to do here. Dog sledding and longer hikes are popular with French visitors, for example. British travelers are especially interested in snowmobiles, and the Asian tourists are most keen on seeing the northern lights.
Valentine Beats grew up in Botswana but moved to Finland 2 decades ago and says his thriving husky sledding business has been a long-term dream. He caters to more and more eco-aware tourists who care about animal welfare and the green credentials of his operation.
If you want to differentiate yourself from your competitors or something, this is one of the ways of doing it. And there is a growing slice of the, or a growing group of people who actually think this is important.
Until Christmas.
As the days count down to Christmas, one man insists that all the extra visitors to his grotto won't leave him rushing to deliver all the presents. The rest of Lapland's tourist industry is having to learn to balance the complex and competing interests here without the help of magic.
China says the newly created US Space Force is a direct threat to peace and security in the outer space. Foreign Ministry spokesman Gang Shuang said China is deeply concerned and resolutely opposed to it. At the weekly news briefing, the ministry said the relevant US actions are a serious violation of international consensus on the peaceful use of outer space. US President Donald Trump signed the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act into law on Friday. Air Force Secretary Barbara Barrett said the space capacities of the US should be enhanced as China and Russia pose a growing threat. The 2019 Wings for Love Wingsuit Flying World Cup concluded its 3-day trial event in southwest China's Yunnan province. The $14,000 prize money will be donated to a special education school. For more, watch this report.
Australian flyer Scotty Patterson claimed the title. French player Vincent Cote won second place and American wingsuit pilot Patrick Walker finished third. All three have qualified for the final to be held in 2020.
It went okay, hit the middle of the target, so yeah, I'm pretty happy with that.
A total of 14 daredevils from 10 countries jumped from a helicopter at the height of 2,000 meters. They performed jaw-dropping stunts in the air before flying through 2 hot air balloons up 200 meters above the ground.
It was actually perfect. It was beautiful up there. Didn't have a lot of time to go set up for a perfect landing, but it was still great.
Set up in 2014, the Wings for Love World Cup is the biggest international wingsuit flying competition of its kind. It is its tradition to donate the prize money to impoverished local children.
In Russia, Moscow has hosted a unique fashion show for elderly ladies. It features radiant 50-plus grannies hitting the catwalk, obviously having a lot of fun doing it. More about the show in this report.
For a serious fashion city like Moscow, this mature beauty fashion show is a light-hearted change of tone. Embracing their grey hair and wrinkles, Russian grannies walk the ramp with style and pride. One of the participants, Tatiana Fresher-Egorova, said aging can be attractive too.
What did the grannies do 20 years ago? Eating seeds, sitting on a bench, grandchildren, dacha, and that is all. But here these grannies, moving like queens in fancy outfits, agree with me. Aging is much more attractive. For many, this is hope for the future.
Beginning in 2014, the fashion show has grown year on year and intends to help the elderly feel more comfortable in their skin. It gives spectators different perspectives on things that one can do when getting old.
After many years of work, now we are free from work and cares. Now we are living to the fullest. This is one of the events which is for us, at least for me, an emotional explosion, emotional pleasure. That is what I have always been enjoying.
Organized by an elderly-oriented website, the fashion show enjoys support from various Russian charity organizations.
The International Monetary Fund has said India is in the midst of a significant economic slowdown. In its annual review, IMF said declining consumption and investment and falling tax revenue have exerted pressure on India's growth engine. IMF called for an urgent action to address the current downturn. The fund warned the government has limited space to boost spending to support growth given high debt levels and interest payments. India's economy grew at 4.5% in the third quarter, down from 7% a year ago. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.